All right. Yeah. Well, thanks so much for sort of coming tonight. My name is Raditya Nuradi, and as Raymond said, I'm a PhD student at Kyushu University. What I do is really similar to what Hatsumi Sensei did. I follow people around and then ask really, really stupid questions like, why do you drink beer? Well, no, that's not what I actually ask. But today I will not be reading my field notes because I can't even read my own writing. But I will be talking about something that I imagine is pretty interesting for all of us, something called anime pilgrimage. It's in Japanese, the common term is Seichi Junrei, which literally translates to sacred site sort of pilgrimage. All right, and hello. Yeah, so Raymond earlier mentioned sort of Star Trek, right? Any other Trekkie here? No? Okay, a few. I actually don't really know that much about Star Trek myself, but or maybe something else. There's a lot of like very interesting sort of fandom out there, right? Like really anything Star Trek. Anyone here like a huge fan of anything? Like movie, TV shows, books?
I would say so.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. So okay, let's go back to sort of Star Trek. Imagine if you are a Trekkie. Have you ever wanted to sort of be, or go, or be inside the Enterprise, or like meet or talk to like Spock or Kirk, or if you like Sherlock Holmes, if you ever wanted to go to Baker Street, right? People who do enjoy sort of those books or movies, they've actually done that. Well, maybe not go inside the Enterprise, but like they've visited, Baker Street, or they've tried to go to places that are important or that have meanings because of all these very sort of big sort of cultural sort of media that are important to them. And the same thing goes with sort of anime. But next, yes. All right, but let's talk about words. So I did mention earlier sort of anime pilgrimage, but when you hear the word pilgrimage, sort of what comes to mind? And I have 4 different images here. But does any of this to you look like a pilgrimage? Do you think they're more of, I don't know, tourism? Carl might have a few things to say worse than that. But I don't know. Yeah, I mean, what do you think? These are 4 different places. If I say, like, for example, if I ask you to sort of divide them between pilgrimage and tourism, which one would be, and which one would be pilgrimage and which one would be tourism, for example?
Bottom left.
Right and left. Interesting. Okay.
Bottom left.
Okay, bottom left would be.
Pilgrimage.
Okay, why?
Those aren't religious.
Interesting. Okay, because of like the outfits, or.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
And the hat.
And the hat. Okay.
I'll see everything except the bottom right.
Very interesting. Very interesting. This is actually a picture of the Shikoku Henro, which is sort of the Shikoku pilgrimage in sort of Shikoku. That is Santiago de Compostela, a very, very major sort of pilgrimage site. And this is actually a temple in Thailand, also a pilgrimage site.
Okay.
But this is the one that someone said does not really look like. And I mean that's the thing with like sort of terminologies, right? Like
What's this one?
that one.
Top right.
What do you think?
Looks like a gravesite.
Yes, of Elvis Presley, actually.
Oh.
Yeah, this is Graceland. Yeah.
It is a holy site. Then.
Yes. So a lot of very different sites with very different meanings given to them by very different people, institutions, and through very different processes as well. But sort of going back sort of with words, that's the thing with sort of terminologies. They're not as strict and as binary as we often make them out to be, especially when you're the ones out there. Like the Shikoku Henro, how do you get to Shikoku? Like all these 88 different sites, so far apart. Yes, you can go ahead and try to like walk through all of them. That would take maybe a month or so if you take your time, maybe a bit less than a few weeks if you really rush. But often people would take a car, right, and then take a break, enjoy the sights, take selfies, maybe enjoy the local delicacy. It's often a mix of different things. Pilgrimage and tourism has always been part of pretty much the same activity. Victor Turner, a really big person in sort of anthropology, which I don't really care about and you really shouldn't care about as well. But he also says that if you're a tourist, then you're a half pilgrim, basically. And that's what people have been using a lot to sort of say that the two are really close to one another and that we really shouldn't take them apart. But yeah, so going back to sort of Star Trek and pop culture, a lot of things, like a lot of really meaningful worlds that's been constructed through sort of this popular sort of culture media stuffs, right? The Wizarding World of Harry Potter, Asakusa, that's actually a shrine in Saitama. That is a site for like a very popular anime. But you know, when you hear about sort of these trips and sort of about these journeys, you often would imagine that they're a very recent thing. Actually, they're not, right? People back in the sort of Victorian Britain, they've like very well, okay, maybe not all of them, but like elite people who have the money and the means to, they go around and visit places that are featured in, I don't know, Charles Dickens or like all these really popular novels back then, right? Heian period Japan, Sarashina Nikki, which is written by like a very also elite sort of aristocratic sort of background, or sort of this lady in waiting, and it's all about like how all these sites that she's read in like ancient sort of Chinese literature really excites her, or like how she's really interested in sort of finding these places in Japan as well. So it's all connecting real life places with imagination and then attaching meanings to them, right? It's been happening for quite a while, yeah. And I mean, even in sort of the Edo period, you have huge pilgrimage sites, like temples, really big temples. Asakusa, for example, you have Sensoji Shrine, which is still, there's still a shrine there in Sensoji there. And Sensoji Shrine, you know, people go there because back in the Edo period, the only way you can go out is by saying that you're going on a pilgrimage, because the government sort of basically limits mobility. And what people do is, you know, they all say that they're going on a pilgrimage so that they can go out and get sort of all these passports, so to speak. And then they'd go to like a brothel or go get some drinks. And they're placed often right outside the temples, right? So it's really pleasure and play at the same time, or pleasure and prey at the same time. And yeah, I mean, that's something that's still happening now, even with like all these pop culture related stuffs. But yeah, sort of finally getting into what anime pilgrimage is. As I've mentioned before, it's the most common term in Japan is Seichijunrei. It's not limited to that. I don't like to sort of limit things, just because what I find that the basic sort of element of these journeys are very similar. I mean, sure, there are, you know, differences, but yeah, I mean, pop culture inspired sort of journeys is basically what I would call them. But Seichijunrei in Japanese, and yes, they sort of mainly refer to sort of trips or journeys by fans to anything related to any manga or anime, and this can be anything. Like you know, it can be a place that shares the same name with like a protagonist of like that show. Like we have a shrine nearby in Dazaifu, Kamado Shrine, and if anyone's heard of Kimetsu no Yaiba or like Demon Slayer, the protagonist of that show is Kamado, Tanjiro, yes. And then Kamado Shrine, just because that shrine shares the same name, people started going there and then, you know, going to sort of doing different things there. Does the shrine have any official relationship with the anime? Absolutely not. Are they welcoming? That's a much more complicated question because it really depends on the site. But yeah, so the nature of sort of these trips, how they're constructed, how it starts, whether it lasts or not, really depends on that site. It's so diverse that it's really difficult to sort of generalize. But yeah. Okay, so what do people do when they actually go there, right? A lot of it is, well, as you often do when you go on like, you know, a travel anywhere, you take pictures, right? You take pictures of yourself, you take pictures of the place. Often like a common practice that people do is they would compare the like real life sort of site with like a scene from that show and just try to find like the perfect angle that really is sort of the exact same scene, or try to recreate that. Um, some places, some cities. There's like a city in Gifu actually, Hida, and the mayor actually sets up like so there's anyone maybe seen Kimi no Nawa or Your Name or have heard of it? It's the sort of setting of Kimi no Nawa, and the mayor of that city, because people started coming in there because of Kimi no Nawa, just like this like really like remote bus stop in the middle of nowhere, and in the anime there's a bus stop sign. It's not there in the real life. What the mayor did is he actually added that bus stop. So yeah, people sort of institutions respond in various different ways as well. Material culture is really big in sort of anime pilgrimage as well, because if it's a shrine, especially, Emma offerings are very common, and people would, just draw illustrations of their favorite characters. And the messages, of course, there's like a mix of them. You have, God, these Emma. There's so many different things in them. Like in one Emma, you can have like an illustration of, well, I don't know, Kimetsu no Yaiba, for example, and then like the wishes or like the prayers would be something completely different. Like, oh, I need to pass my next test or something like that, or like give me lots of money or something like that. Lots of sort of, especially with Kamado, just because for some reason Kimetsu is really popular with children. There's a lot of sort of children or Emma dedicated by children. Emma are these sort of wooden votive tablets, by the way. And yeah, I mean, they do a variety of different things. This one is a sort of coffee shop. Not really a coffee shop. It's like well, I guess it is. It's a structure right next to the Buke Yashiki, or like the sort of warrior samurai sort of mansion in Hitoyoshi City. And the sort of caretaker of this particular sort of site. So the samurai thing has nothing to do with sort of the anime, but the caretaker is a relative of Midorikawa Yuki, and she's the author of this series, Natsume Yujincho, which is set, or people say that it's set in that city. So the author of that manga donates a lot of like merch related to sort of the anime, and then because he's a relative, he just puts that there, and people started going there. So this place has barely anything to do. Like the place itself is nothing to do with like the show. Well, it's because it's set in the same city, but like there's no scene in the anime that is set in this sort of little sort of restaurant, coffee shop place. But people go there. Why do people go on these trips? Which seems obvious, and it is obvious at times. But it's difficult too, because as with most sort of human activities, there's always a variety of reasons, right? Like you'd imagine that maybe finding that connection with sort of that show, like that work that you really love, is major. Sure, that's true. But when it comes to actually going there, right? Like it takes a lot of planning, especially when the place is really remote, if it's really difficult to get to. So logistics is often actually a lot of one of the main reasons that people quote when I talk to them, right? Yeah, they like the show, but it's like, it's really far, I just don't have the time. And in other times, if it's like close, then like, yeah, I don't really, I've seen like a few episodes, I don't really like it, but it's like, I'm here, I'm visiting for other reasons anyway, why not? So yeah, all of these sort of factors, they play a part in sort of why people go. How do they start? I'm actually trained as a religious studies and scholar, and sort of often the terminology that we use to describe pretty much everything are narratives, ritual practices, and institutions. Because we don't like to use the word religion, because we don't know what that is. Yeah, so it starts with the narrative, right? Like it starts with like all these worlds, these stories that are built. And then you have institutional support in some level. Like maybe that's at the city level. Often it starts from like a very individual sort of level, like maybe like a local realize that, oh, people start visiting like our like random like shrine just because it's connected to some weird show, and then thinks that they can do something about it, like maybe they can support it better, and then starts I don't know, like a plan or something, bring it to the city level, and then they do something else with that. And then repetition, right? Like the entire, or at least in Japan, like the anime-related sort of trips, it's difficult to directly trace when they started, but maybe early sort of 1990s with sort of the place in Tokyo, Sailor Moon's Hikawa Shrine. In Tokyo is arguably what people say is probably one of the first incidents in Japan. And
That's actually a real place.
yeah,
Oh shit.
yeah, yes, yes, yeah, and you know, people use not just that as a model, but like there's a lot of self-references between these. Like, for example, another practice that's often people do in sort of during the pilgrimage is they write on these notebooks and just write anything really, like anything you want. And that is also something that happens because people learn about, like for example, we want to turn this place into, let's say, a pilgrimage for some reason. And how do we make this like successful? How do we get people to come? Well, you learn from other places, and that's sort of repetition. That's ritual, and of course there's an involvement from various different parties. Economics, money is always central to anything, especially in religion. And yeah, that's again how it really starts. Really depends on the site. Most of the times, initiated by the fans, and then in one way or another supported by institutions. Yeah, the current state, which is not really a good title, but there's a variety of different ways. It's really diffused because you don't get like a. There's an organization called Jinja Honcho in Japan, which basically, or not really organizes, but shrines are registered under Jinja Honcho, and often their narratives are to a certain extent controlled is not the right term. They're basically, they don't want to go against Jinja Honcho's sort of main direction. Like you might have whatever deity that you want, but like if you talk about like the emperor's lineage or like why the emperor can't be like a woman or anything like that, if anything of that is included in like your main narrative, you're probably not going to be part of Jinja Honcho. But when it comes to sort of anime pilgrimage, there is no like organization like that sort of manages everything. There's no limits in the sense of like, unless the local people are just really, really against you, people visiting, you can kind of do whatever you want. And that's what happens. That's why there's so much variety. It's also mostly at the grassroots level, again, because there's no like national organization or anything like that. There's the sort of anime tourism 88, but that is the different thing that we don't have the time to go through today. But what is obvious about them is they all influence the communities in various different ways, right? Like just imagine if the place that you're living to, right? If people started going to, I don't know, like your apartment, like from one day, and then started putting weird things in front of them, and that accumulates, right? Maybe for like the first few days you're okay with that, but again, imagine if that happens for like 10 years or 20 years, right? It gets really complex because that influenced the communities in various different ways. Yeah, I mean, when you do research on anything contemporary, like people often ask, well, what about the future? What's going to happen? We don't know, really. We don't know. Is the most, I think, simplest answer we can say, especially with something like this. Pilgrimage itself is sort of a phenomenon that's been happening for a very, very long time, but they adapt to sort of societal changes. They adapt to various different things. There's never been like every time people say, oh, this is like a 500,000-year-old tradition, it's often something that they started last year or something like that. So transformation is key, right? Because people need to transform and adapt in order to survive. Some places have shown signs of continuity. Like there's a festival in Kanazawa in like sort of a small district called Iwaku district. It's like a small onsen town. And they basically 10 years ago, there's like an anime set in that sort of city, and one of the do I have to, I didn't even.
You have 20 seconds.
I have 20 seconds. Okay, I'll be finishing it really soon. And one of the people from the tourism bureau of sort of that city, they cooperated with sort of the anime production company, and they start a completely fictional sort of festival that is based on something that sort of appeared in the anime. And they didn't plan that to be something that they want to continue doing for like years and years, but it's been happening for 10 years, almost every year, unless there's like a typhoon or anything really major.
Or a global pandemic.
Or a global pandemic, precisely. And now, so I went to like the 10th anniversary of that festival last year, and narratives are like how they promote that starts to change, just because they're like, well, it's been 10 years. Some people still like the anime, but it's not the the next like hit thing anymore. Are we gonna continue maintaining that like this face that we want to promote, or are we gonna turn this into something different, like maybe something that like a local thing? And they are struggling with that. So yeah, it's difficult to say. But yeah, that's I think mostly it for me today. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you very much. Okay, floor is open for some questions. Go ahead. Yes.
Carl.
I'm raising my hand because I work in a tourism bureau.
Yeah.
One of the examples I wanted to bring up, because you were talking about Kamado earlier.
Yeah.
In Kyushu, they have another piece of Kimetsu no Yaiba
Yep.
related.
Yep.
It's the stone that's split in
Yeah.
half, correct? So I can tell you, as someone that works in the tourism bureaus are very interested in using these as soft power to promote their destinations. So whenever but we don't start tourism bureaus don't create them, because usually people in tourism bureaus don't know anything about anime.
Yeah.
They just all of a sudden people start going oh, they like this, right?
Yeah.
And then they'll be like, all right, we got to start push that really hard.
Yeah, they
and
don't
I think
do that. They should.
Yeah, but they're doing
They
that
need
now.
some more nerds in
So
tourism.
so I can tell you from I don't work in Kyushu's tourism bureau, of course, but as someone that works in a Fukuokan tourism bureau, generally what happens from what I understand is that those places become oh, there's some grassroots. Then the city starts pumping resources into promoting that, especially when it's a maybe a temple that was previously no one cared about.
Yeah.
And then that becomes a new place for it's soft power, if that works. So it's very interesting because there's that commercialization in addition to what's really a holy site, and how that meshes or those spaces mesh is actually very interesting. As someone that works on trying to promoting these for financial ends.
Yeah.
So, and Fukuoka City, of course, we don't have that many yet, here specifically,
Yeah.
from what I understand. But yeah, that's definitely something that's come up a lot when I'm at work. So, just interesting to bring up.
I mean, it's interesting because it sounds like it's something that can bring a lot of money in, but when you actually want to do something, it gets more complicated. Because I mean, are you going to contact the production company? If you're going to sell merchandises, right? How is that going to work out?
Does it actually make money?
It does.
A very good
does?
question.
Yes.
Yes, to a certain extent.
So I have a question.
Oops.
This might be a kind of devil's advocate. Because I'm not comfortable about using the same words for the real serious pilgrimage and anime pilgrimage, because they say it's Sage Junban. But I first heard that word. It sounds so strange. I can understand the meaning, but don't they need to use different terminal terms to say that?
Yeah, that's a very important question. This is again why it's complicated, because in Japanese, referring to sort of older trips and sort of journeys, various different ones, there's at least 20 different terms. There's Hendo, Jinrei, Jinreki, Henreki, what else? Mairi, Mode. There's so many different ones. They all. You're right, yeah, because they all are some form of trips to sacred sites. Various different forms, and how people do it are various different ways. But we all in the Anglophone study of that, we just use pilgrimage. It's often, obviously, as he pointed out, it's not enough, right? Because there's just so many different things. Seichi Junrei is a very contemporary term. It's never been used to refer to any more sort of older forms of journeys. Junrei, I think, is more commonly used just for pilgrimages in general, but I think it's more often when people talk about trips outside of Japan, like the Santiago Junrei, but they don't say Shikoku Junrei. It's Hendo, right? It's the Hendo.
Might be that when young people listen to this, when you heard this, then they think of the anime ones, not the real ones, probably. And if they hear the Seichi Junrei, probably they think about the anime ones, not the real pilgrimage.
I mean, maybe. I guess it.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I'm saying that
Yeah.
not now, but in the future, we will lose the culture of the real ones.
In what
Yeah,
way?
what you say about pilgrimage? For my generation, if someone says pilgrimage, then we think about the Shikoku Jutei or other serious ones, not the animals.
Right, yeah. Well, I mean, that's sort of part of, I think, what we are trying to do here, right? Because fundamentally, they're not that different. Like, all the elements that are there in any types of sort of sacred sites are part of basically the same type of activity.
He's a religious study.
That's why we don't just sort of, we look at the elements and how it's constructed. Like, because we know it gets really complicated. We're like, well, this is this and this is that. Yeah, you know what? Let's forget all about that because it gets confusing. Let's just look at what they do, and what kind of similarities they have. Right? Like, material culture is really big because that's something you find in almost all pilgrimage. Like, people leave sort of objects, like real, like material objects in almost every sort of pilgrimages, right? That's sort of the kind of thing that you can find sort of similarities between these different trips. But yeah.
Behind Mike, yeah.
I would say, like, in what way do you think this relates also to, like, maybe like Bakhtin or like the notion of carnival, like a
Bakhtin's carnival.
yeah, space outside of like normal social control that individuals are allowed to blow off steam or reject social norms. Do you think there's a relation there, or?
Yeah, that is a very good question that I actually don't know how to answer. Yeah, Bakhtin's carnivalesque is really it's.
Well, I had never considered it until I saw
Yeah,
it.
that's
It's
true.
it's really fascinating, the similarities there from a.
Because I mean, mainly the festivality of sort of these trips are sometimes big too, right? Like especially, well, okay, it depends. Like you can, because people often go either on their own or like on smaller groups. Whereas you imagine with like, like the sort of Bakhtin sort of carnivalesque, it's like a really big event with like all of these different things, and I think it can transform into that. So there is a potential for that, but I mean maybe it's not always that. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't really give you a better answer.
Well, very fascinating speech, but this is between two weeks. Is there any places that you recommend in the greater Kyushu area?
The
Kyushu area.
In Kyushu.
Yeah.
depends on what you are interested in, I guess.
Well, apart from Kankure and the Kyushu one.
Well, of course you'd be into Kankure.
Yeah, of course. I'm going to Sasebo tomorrow. Come on.
You mean
There's no
There's
name.
like maybe two other people who understand what the fuck you're talking
Oh,
about.
oh, you mean like sort of
Yakushima. Oh,
yeah. I mean yeah, some people have been to Yakushima. Kamado is nice. What else? I mean, Hitoyoshi is just a really nice town. Like it's really difficult to go there now because of the flood a few years ago. Like access to that place is very limited. But
Isn't Hita the town that the author
Shingeki no
Attack on Titan
Kyojin?
is from?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I went there and
Oh,
they had
that's
a lot
right.
of
Oita?
good
Yeah, yeah.
stuff, so.
yeah, I guess Hita
And
is
good
another
food, and they have good food
recommendation.
there.
Yeah, he does nice.
They have a lot of good food there too, so you can eat good.
See? So yeah, Hita. I guess.
Actually, in connection to that, so in things like, okay, you're talking about pilgrimages, like actual locations or like location studies set, and then you mentioned about like one of the author's relatives running a place.
Oh, yeah.
Now there are places that like in Kumamoto where say, Kidabi running, but in Kumamoto where the author of like One Piece is from, and the city itself is kind of like, it's very non-grassroots almost. They're trying to putting up statues and whatnot.
Yeah.
That.
Yeah, it's true.
Is that do the same Seichi Junrei things apply in that in those kinds of categories, where a city where it's maybe non-grassroots but like not exactly a location, but the author is from there or
Yeah.
some kind of
there's less examples when that's the case. It's often it starts from the grassroots and then it develops into something bigger. There's more Ghost of Tsushima, for example. Literally Tsushima. Now the like official website of Tsushima has like references to that game. I think and now has like a guide of like the island using like terminologies from the game.
Kyushu University research was involved in that.
Well, okay, I didn't know. So yeah, in that case, yeah, I mean that we see different, I guess, levels of sort of how this starts. I mean, I'd consider that all part of the same practice, but I guess what is, I mean, not really the main important thing, but like it starts out with the fans, and because I mostly talk to the fans, and that's the one that people who do research on this topic never actually, for some strange reason, never really look at. They're like, look at all these weird. Have you talked to these living human beings that are not any different than us? But yeah, anyway, yeah, we actually are very critical on using that word weeb as well. But yeah, anyway, yeah. So, but yeah. So that's yeah. I mean, sure, why not?
Sorry, but
you two have to decide who's going to speak.
please start.
I guess I have a question about, has there been situations where sort of like an anime has been created with the intention of promoting tourism, and if not, do you think that's like a potential new route that tourism bureaus might pursue?
Nice.
Yeah. There's been. I'm trying to think of like an exact example.
Is Zombieland Saga one of those, or is that still the other way around?
I think with Zombieland Saga, so with things like Zombieland Saga, they plant that from the start.
Well,
It's not just about promoting Saga. I mean, if you.
yeah, I'm sorry, but like,
Yeah.
I'm a bit of a connoisseur into that. That's like the practice of
Let's get on with it.
the practice of like, promoting a specific place has been some kind of rare because it's not just the place itself. Perhaps the Sakura Quest, something like that, is like very similar. But then again, into a specific topic like horse racing or something like that, or like the Neko tradition, whatever. That's gonna be like converted into a genre or a anime more easily because like as a perspective of both a consumer and a author, like the content creator, I think like it's a good starting point to do the whole thing. So that like it's basically having a specific genre, like a specific field, and then again the author's gonna add some of these like Jimoto element into the whole thing.
So that doesn't answer the question.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I guess the quick answer is yes. There has been cases, but
Yeah, when
yeah.
I play Yakushima, I feel like I'm in nature. I feel like I'm in the manga.
Yeah, just do you have an example?
I mean, I would say that it's to the extent of creating an entire series about something, but a lot of like tourism bureaus try to like make things more friendly or more accessible by creating like anime type content regarding it, like Kokura, for example. When Kita Kyushu like put a lot of effort into marketing like Musashi, like his Seven Rings story and his duel with what's his name? I forget. Ganryu. So like they made this like for like meeting planners, they made like this anime
Kokura
type
Castle,
video
right?
where they're
Yeah,
about to have a duel,
Yeah.
and then this woman
Saw
that's
that.
like his wife comes up and is like, "Well, wait, we can have events in the city instead or
Yes.
something." So I was like, I mean, they're trying something. I don't know how.
I saw it in the castle.
Yeah, so I was laughing when I watched this at work. It's like, watch this new video that they commissioned. I'm like, wow, it's like an anime. But I was like, it was kind of badly made,
Yeah.
to be honest.
How
You're not going to go on pilgrimage over this.
Yeah, but I mean that's why narratives are important, right? Like, you need like that pitch to
Exactly.
start it. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, we're out of time, so you can ask. You're sticking around a little bit, right?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, all right, get another round of applause.
Hey.